The words hit me like a sledgehammer through the conference room speakers. Jessica, we need to discuss your unprofessional conduct. After careful consideration, we've decided to terminate your employment effective immediately. Your behavior has become disruptive to team morale, and frankly, your attitude doesn't align with our company values. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed. Because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. I sat frozen in the sterile conference room of Meridian Financial Services, staring at my supervisor Diana Mitchell's cold expression, while HR representative Kevin Walsh shuffled through termination paperwork. The same conference room where I'd presented quarterly reports that exceeded expectations. The same table where I'd outlined strategies that had saved the company hundreds of thousands of dollars. The same chair where I'd sat through countless meetings, watching mediocrity get rewarded while excellence got scrutinized. Jessica, did you hear what I said? Diana's voice cut through my shock. We'll need your badge, laptop, and company phone. Security will escort you to collect your personal items. I found my voice, though it came out steadier than I felt. Diana, I think there's been some kind of misunderstanding. What specific unprofessional conduct are you referring to? Diana's perfectly manicured fingers drummed against her leather portfolio. Your questioning of established protocols, your suggestions that undermine department leadership, and your general resistance to following directives. Several team members have complained about your attitude. Several team members. I knew exactly which team members she meant. The same ones who showed up late, missed deadlines, and somehow always managed to redirect blame when projects went sideways. The same ones who laughed along when Diana made her passive-aggressive comments about young employees who think they know better than their supervisors. I was providing feedback based on industry best practices, I said carefully. My suggestions were backed by data and research. I wasn't questioning your authority. I was trying to improve our processes. Kevin Walsh cleared his throat and slid a document across the table. Ms. Thompson, this is your termination agreement. You'll receive 2 weeks severance pay, and your health insurance will continue through the end of the month. In exchange, you agree not to pursue any legal action against the company or discuss proprietary information with competitors. I stared at the document without picking it up. Jessica Thompson, 28 years old, MBA from Northwestern, 3 years of exemplary performance reviews, and now being fired for being unprofessional. The irony wasn't lost on me that the most professional person in this room was being terminated for that exact quality. What Diana didn't know, what none of them knew, was that for the past 6 months, I'd been part of a confidential corporate restructuring initiative. What they couldn't possibly imagine was that their unprofessional employee had just been promoted to regional director for the entire Midwest division, a position that would make me Diana's boss's boss. But I couldn't reveal that yet. The announcement wasn't scheduled for another 2 weeks, and I'd signed strict confidentiality agreements about the reorganization. So I had to sit there and take their condescension, while knowing that in 14 days, everything would change. I stood up slowly, my mind racing with the implications of what was happening. I need to understand something, Diana. Are you firing me because of my work performance or because of personality conflicts? Diana's expression hardened. Your work performance has been adequate, Jessica. But attitude is just as important as output in a professional environment. We need team players, not individuals who think they can single-handedly revolutionize our entire department. Adequate. 3 years of exceeding targets, streamlining processes, and generating innovative solutions, and she called it adequate. I thought about the client retention strategy I'd developed that had increased our renewal rates by 23%. I thought about the cost reduction analysis that had eliminated redundant vendor contracts, saving the company $180,000 annually. I thought about the training program I'd designed that had reduced onboarding time for new hires by 40%. All of it dismissed as adequate by a woman who spent more time managing up than managing effectively, whose biggest contribution to the department was implementing a color-coded filing system that everyone ignored. I see, I said quietly. And who will be handling my current projects? The Morrison account review is due next week, and the quarterly analysis for the Peterson Group needs to be completed by month end. Diana waved her hand dismissively. We'll redistribute your responsibilities among the existing team. Don't worry about the transition. We'll manage just fine without you. I almost laughed at that. The Morrison account was worth $2.8 million annually, and I was the only one who understood the complexity of their investment portfolio. The Peterson Group analysis required advanced statistical modeling that no one else in the department had the skills to complete. But Diana seemed confident that everything would be just fine. All right, I said, signing the termination agreement with steady hands. I'll collect my things and be out within the hour. As I walked through the office toward my cubicle, I could feel eyes following me. Word traveled fast in corporate environments, and everyone knew what it meant when security accompanied someone to their desk. Some of my colleagues looked sympathetic, others seemed relieved that they weren't in my position, and a few appeared almost satisfied. Sarah Chen from accounting hurried over as I began emptying my desk drawers. Jess, I can't believe this is happening. What are you going to do? Sarah was one of the few genuine people in the office, someone who'd always appreciated my analytical approach and never seemed threatened by competence. I wanted to tell her that everything would be okay, that this was actually the best thing that could have happened, but I couldn't reveal the truth. I'll figure something out, I said, placing my professional development books into a cardboard box. Maybe this is an opportunity to find somewhere that values innovation over conformity. You're too good for this place anyway, Sarah whispered, glancing around to make sure Diana wasn't within earshot. Everyone knows you're the one who actually keeps this department running. Diana's just jealous because you make her look incompetent. I appreciated Sarah's loyalty, but I also knew that speaking up for me could put her own job at risk. Thanks, Sarah. I'll stay in touch. As I packed my personal items, a small succulent plant, a Northwestern University coffee mug, family photos, and the various awards I'd received for outstanding performance, I reflected on how I'd ended up in this situation. I'd started at Meridian Financial Services straight out of graduate school, excited to apply my education in a real-world environment. The company had a solid reputation, competitive benefits, and what seemed like opportunities for advancement. For the first year, everything went smoothly. I worked hard, learned quickly, and received positive feedback from both clients and supervisors. The problem started when Diana Mitchell was promoted to department manager 18 months ago. Diana had been with the company for 8 years, steadily climbing the ladder through a combination of political savvy and risk-averse decision-making. She was the type of manager who preferred maintaining the status quo over pursuing improvements that might reflect poorly on her if they didn't work perfectly. From the beginning, Diana and I clashed over methodology. She favored traditional approaches that had worked in the past, while I advocated for data-driven strategies that could improve efficiency and results. When I suggested updating our client assessment protocols to include more comprehensive risk analysis, Diana dismissed it as, quote, unnecessary complexity. When I proposed implementing new software that could automate routine calculations and reduce errors, she said we couldn't afford to fix what wasn't broken. The tension escalated over time as I continued to voice suggestions and Diana continued to reject them. What I saw as constructive feedback, she interpreted as insubordination. What I considered professional development, she viewed as a threat to her authority. The final straw had come 3 weeks ago, during a team meeting about client satisfaction scores. Our department's ratings had been declining for 6 months, and upper management was asking for explanations and improvement plans. I'd prepared a detailed analysis showing correlation between client dissatisfaction and our outdated service delivery methods. During my presentation, I'd outlined specific changes that could address the most common client complaints: delayed response times, inconsistent communication, and limited access to real-time portfolio information. My recommendations included staff retraining, process automation, and enhanced client portal functionality. Diana had listened with increasing irritation before cutting me off mid-sentence. Jessica, this is exactly the kind of attitude I'm talking about. You're implying that our current methods are inadequate, and that you know better than the people who've been doing this job for years. I'm not implying anything, I'd responded. The data clearly shows that client satisfaction correlates with service responsiveness and communication quality. These aren't opinions. They're measurable metrics. Not everything is about data, Jessica. Sometimes experience and intuition matter more than spreadsheets and theories. The room had fallen silent as Diana and I stared at each other across the conference table. I could see that I'd crossed some invisible line, but I genuinely couldn't understand how presenting factual analysis could be considered disrespectful. Now, 3 weeks later, I was being escorted out of the building for being unprofessional. The security guard, a kind older man named Frank who'd always greeted me warmly in the mornings, looked uncomfortable as he accompanied me to the parking garage. "Sorry about this, Ms. Thompson. For what it's worth, I think they're making a mistake." "Thanks, Frank. I appreciate that more than you know." As I loaded my box of belongings into my Honda Civic, I thought about what Diana had said about attitude being as important as performance. She wasn't wrong about that. Attitude did matter in professional environments. But there was a difference between having a negative attitude and having standards. There was a difference between being difficult and being thorough. I'd never been rude to colleagues or dismissive of their ideas. I'd never missed deadlines or submitted subpar work. I'd never complained about assignments or shirked responsibilities. My crime had been suggesting that we could do better, that we should strive for excellence rather than settle for mediocrity. Driving home through Chicago traffic, I found myself thinking about the conversation I'd had 2 weeks ago with Regional Vice President Michael Rodriguez. He'd called me personally to discuss the new position, explaining that the company was restructuring to address performance issues in several key markets. "Jessica, your work has been exceptional," he'd said. "Your analytical skills and innovative thinking are exactly what we need to turn around our Midwest operations. This position will give you the authority to implement the kinds of changes you've been advocating for." The irony was almost funny. While Diana was firing me for being unprofessional, the company's senior leadership was promoting me for the exact same qualities she found objectionable. While she saw my suggestions as insubordination, they saw them as leadership potential. But the promotion came with a catch: absolute confidentiality until the official announcement. The restructuring involved significant personnel changes across multiple departments, and premature disclosure could create chaos and uncertainty among employees. I'd agreed to the terms, knowing that discretion was essential for a smooth transition. What I hadn't anticipated was being fired during the interim period. The timing was almost impossibly bad, or impossibly perfect, depending on how you looked at it. As I pulled into my apartment complex parking lot, my phone buzzed with a text message from my best friend Rachel, who worked in marketing at a different company downtown. "Heard through the grapevine that something happened at Meridian today. You okay?" News traveled fast in Chicago's financial sector. I typed back, "Long story. Can we grab dinner tonight? I need to decompress." "Absolutely. 7 p.m. at Giuseppe's?" "Perfect. See you there." I carried my box of office belongings up 2 flights of stairs to my apartment, a modest 1-bedroom place in Lincoln Park that I'd been saving to upgrade once my career advanced. Setting the box on my kitchen counter, I looked around at my carefully organized living space and tried to process what had just happened. In a span of 2 hours, I'd gone from being a terminated employee to a future executive, though only I knew about the second part. The emotional whiplash was disorienting. Part of me was devastated by the humiliation of being fired, especially in such a public way. Another part was excited about the opportunities that lay ahead. And a small, vindictive part was already anticipating Diana's reaction when she learned the truth. I made coffee and sat at my small dining table, trying to figure out how to handle the next 2 weeks. I couldn't tell anyone about the promotion, but I also couldn't let people think I was unemployed and desperate. I needed to maintain some professional dignity while keeping the biggest secret of my career. The apartment felt quieter than usual, the absence of my normal work routine creating a strange sense of displacement. I was used to busy days filled with client calls, report analysis, and project deadlines. Now I had 2 weeks of enforced vacation before stepping into a role that would change everything. I thought about Diana's dismissive attitude toward data-driven decision-making, her resistance to change, and her need to maintain control through outdated hierarchies. In 2 weeks, I'd be in a position to implement all the improvements I'd been suggesting. The question was whether I'd handle that authority better than she'd handled hers. The afternoon stretched ahead of me, empty and full of possibility at the same time. I had calls to return, references to prepare, and a story to craft for the inevitable questions about my sudden departure from Meridian. But for now, I just sat in my kitchen, drinking coffee and contemplating the strange twist of fate that had led me here. In 14 days, Diana Mitchell would learn that the unprofessional employee she'd fired was now her superior. In 14 days, the department that would manage just fine without me would discover who their new boss really was. But first, I had to survive 2 weeks of secrecy, uncertainty, and the constant temptation to reveal a truth that would change everything. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The next morning hit me like a cold slap of reality. For the first time in 3 years, I woke up without an alarm, without the familiar anxiety of checking overnight emails, without the mental checklist of daily priorities. The absence of routine felt both liberating and terrifying. I made coffee in my apartment's small kitchen, staring out at the Chicago skyline through my window. Somewhere out there, Diana was probably already at her desk, smug with satisfaction about ridding herself of her most challenging subordinate. Meanwhile, her remaining team was likely scrambling to figure out how to handle the workload she'd confidently claimed they could manage. My phone had been unusually quiet since the termination. No calls from former colleagues. No texts asking for clarification about ongoing projects. No panicked messages about missing passwords or file locations. The silence was telling. Either Diana had explicitly forbidden contact with me, or people were simply too uncomfortable to reach out to someone who'd been so publicly dismissed. The isolation felt strange after years of constant professional interaction. I had grown accustomed to being the person others came to with questions, the one who could untangle complex problems or explain convoluted regulations. Now I was just another unemployed professional in a city full of them, at least as far as anyone knew. I decided to use the forced downtime productively. If I was going to step into a regional director role in less than 2 weeks, I needed to thoroughly understand the scope of what I'd be inheriting. I spent the morning researching Meridian's other Midwest offices, analyzing their performance metrics, and identifying potential operational challenges. What I discovered was both concerning and exciting. The Milwaukee office had been underperforming for 8 consecutive quarters, with client retention rates that were 15% below company standards. The Detroit branch was hemorrhaging young talent, with turnover rates that suggested serious management issues. The Indianapolis location showed promise, but lacked the resources to fully capitalize on their market opportunities. And then there was Chicago, my former office, which on paper looked successful but showed troubling signs of stagnation. Client satisfaction scores had been declining steadily, and while they weren't in crisis territory yet, the trend was unmistakably downward. As I compiled my research, I began to see patterns that explained why corporate had decided on such a dramatic restructuring. The Midwest region wasn't just underperforming, it was systematically failing to adapt to changing market conditions and client expectations. Traditional management approaches that had worked 5 years ago were proving inadequate for today's competitive landscape. My phone rang around noon, interrupting my analysis. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize, but something made me answer. Jessica Thompson? Yes, this is Jessica. This is Marcus Chen, from Peterson Group. I hope you don't mind me calling your personal number. I got it from our contact database. I just heard that you're no longer with Meridian, and I wanted to reach out personally. Marcus Chen. I knew the name well. He was the CEO of Peterson Group, one of our largest clients and someone I'd worked with extensively on their portfolio optimization project. The fact that he was calling me directly was both flattering and concerning. Mr. Chen, thank you for calling. Yes, I've recently left Meridian Financial Services. That's their loss and someone else's gain, he said, without hesitation. Jessica, I have to be frank with you. Your departure has created some serious concerns for us. You've been our primary point of contact for the past 18 months, and frankly, we're not confident that anyone else there understands our portfolio complexity the way you do. I chose my words carefully. I'm sure Meridian will assign someone qualified to handle your account. They have several experienced analysts who can. With respect, Jessica, we've already had preliminary conversations with your former colleagues. and it's clear that there's going to be a significant learning curve. The quarterly analysis you are working on. No one else seems to understand your methodology, or even where to find all the relevant data. This was exactly what I'd been afraid of. The Peterson Group account was worth nearly $3 million annually to Meridian, and I'd spent months developing a customized analytical framework that took into account their unique investment goals and risk tolerance. Diana's assumption that the work could be easily redistributed was proving dangerously naive. Mr. Chen, I'm bound by confidentiality agreements regarding proprietary information, but I'd be happy to provide general guidance to whoever takes over the account. Actually, that's not why I'm calling, he said. We're considering moving our business elsewhere, and we'd like to know if you're planning to land somewhere that could handle accounts of our size and complexity. The conversation was entering dangerous territory. I couldn't reveal my upcoming position, but I also couldn't let a major client walk away from Meridian because of Diana's poor transition planning. Mr. Chen, I appreciate your confidence in my abilities, but I think you should give Meridian a chance to prove they can maintain the service level you've come to expect. Perhaps if you expressed your concerns directly to senior management, they could assign additional resources to ensure a smooth transition. There was a pause. We've already scheduled a meeting with Regional Vice President Rodriguez for next week. If that doesn't go well, we'll be looking at alternatives. Michael Rodriguez. The same man who'd offered me the regional director position was now dealing with client concerns caused by my termination. The irony was becoming increasingly complex. After ending the call with Marcus Chen, I sat staring at my phone for several minutes. The implications were staggering. Diana's decision to fire me wasn't just about internal department dynamics. It was actively threatening major client relationships and revenue streams. I decided to call Sarah Chen from accounting, the one colleague who'd seemed genuinely sympathetic about my departure. We'd maintained a friendship beyond work, so reaching out wouldn't seem unusual. Sarah, it's Jessica. How are things at the office today? Oh my God, Jess, it's been absolute chaos, Sarah said, lowering her voice. Diana called an emergency team meeting this morning, and everyone looks completely overwhelmed. Apparently, both the Morrison and Peterson accounts are asking questions that nobody can answer. What kind of questions? Technical stuff about portfolio analysis and risk calculations. Ben Morrison specifically asked to speak with you, and when Diana told him you were no longer with the company, he requested a meeting with upper management. She looked like she was going to be sick. This was worse than I'd anticipated. Ben Morrison wasn't just any client. He was the founder of Morrison Industries, a manufacturing company whose account had been with Meridian for over a decade. If he was questioning the transition, it meant Diana's reassurances about smooth account management were crumbling in real time. How is Diana handling it? Badly, Sarah whispered. She's been locked in her office making phone calls all morning, and Kevin Walsh from HR has been in and out. There are rumors that she's trying to contact you to ask for help with the transition, but nobody has your personal number. The sweet irony wasn't lost on me. Less than 24 hours after declaring that the department would manage just fine without me, Diana was apparently desperate to reach me for assistance. But I couldn't help, even if I wanted to. Doing so would violate my confidentiality agreement about the upcoming restructuring. Well, I'm sure they'll figure it out, I said diplomatically. They have smart people there. Maybe. But smart people who don't understand your filing system or your analytical models. Tom Jenkins spent 2 hours this morning just trying to find the Peterson Group data files, and when he finally located them, he said your spreadsheets look like, quote, hieroglyphics. Tom Jenkins was a decent analyst, but he specialized in straightforward investment portfolios. The Peterson Group account required understanding of complex derivatives, international currency hedging, and sector-specific risk factors that took months to master. Sarah, I probably shouldn't be discussing internal Meridian business, but you might want to suggest that someone contact the clients directly to set appropriate expectations about the transition timeline. Diana already tried that with Morrison. Apparently, he told her that if the service quality declines, he'll be looking for new representation. She's been stress-eating Tums all day. After hanging up with Sarah, I felt a complicated mix of vindication and concern. Part of me was satisfied that Diana's arrogance was being exposed so quickly, but another part worried about the broader implications for Meridian's reputation and employee morale. I spent the afternoon researching best practices for corporate restructuring, particularly focusing on strategies for minimizing client disruption during leadership transitions. If I was going to step into the regional director role successfully, I needed to be prepared for exactly the kind of crisis that was currently unfolding. The more I learned, the more I realized that my termination might actually be a blessing in disguise. Instead of being caught up in the daily chaos of trying to maintain failing systems, I now had the perspective and authority to implement comprehensive solutions. That evening, Rachel and I met for dinner at Giuseppe's, a small Italian place in Little Italy that had become our regular spot for processing work drama and life updates. "So," Rachel said, settling into our usual booth, "tell me everything. The rumors flying around downtown are absolutely wild." Rachel worked in marketing for a competing financial services firm, so she was well connected to industry gossip. I needed to be careful about what I shared, but I also desperately needed someone to talk to about the surreal situation I found myself in. "It wasn't exactly unexpected," I said, choosing my words carefully. "Diana and I had been clashing for months about methodology and department direction." "But fired?" "Jessica, everyone knows you're one of the most competent analysts in the city. What was the official reason?" "Unprofessional conduct. Apparently, my suggestions for improvement were interpreted as insubordination." Rachel nearly choked on her wine. "That's insane. You're probably the most professional person I know. You're the one who color codes your calendar and sends follow-up emails after every meeting. Apparently, professionalism means different things to different people. So what's your next move? I've already heard from 3 headhunters asking if I know how to reach you. Word is getting out that you're available, and people are interested." This was exactly the kind of complication I'd been dreading. If headhunters were actively pursuing me, it would be increasingly difficult to maintain the fiction that I was genuinely unemployed and looking for work. "I'm taking some time to evaluate my options," I said vaguely. "Maybe this is an opportunity to find somewhere that's a better cultural fit. Have you heard anything from other Meridian offices? I know their Milwaukee branch has been struggling. Maybe they could use someone with your skills." I nearly laughed at the unintentional accuracy of her suggestion. In less than 2 weeks, I'd be responsible for turning around that exact office, along with 3 others. "I'm keeping my options open," I said. "But enough about work drama. How are things with you and David?" The conversation shifted to Rachel's ongoing relationship challenges, giving me a reprieve from having to navigate questions about my employment status. But even as I listened to her stories about dating complications, my mind kept drifting back to the crisis unfolding at my former workplace. By the time I got home that evening, I had 7 missed calls and 12 text messages. 3 were from headhunters who'd somehow obtained my personal number. 2 were from former clients asking about my departure. 1 was from a reporter for a local business journal who'd apparently heard rumors about upheaval at Meridian Financial Services. But the most interesting message was a voicemail from Kevin Walsh in HR, left just 20 minutes earlier. "Jessica, this is Kevin Walsh from Meridian. I hope you don't mind me calling your personal number. We have some questions about client transition procedures, and we were hoping you might be available for a brief consultation call. Obviously, we'd compensate you for your time. Please call me back at your earliest convenience." I stared at my phone in disbelief. Less than 24 hours after escorting me out of the building, they were asking me to consult on the very problems I'd predicted would arise. The audacity was stunning, but it also revealed just how desperate they'd become. I couldn't return Kevin's call without violating my confidentiality agreement, but I also couldn't ignore the implications of what was happening. The smooth transition Diana had promised was falling apart in real time, and the consequences were affecting both employees and clients. I poured myself a glass of wine and sat on my small balcony, looking out at the Chicago skyline as the sun set behind the downtown skyscrapers. Somewhere out there, Diana was probably working late, trying to contain a crisis of her own making. Her remaining team members were likely stressed and overwhelmed, attempting to fill gaps they didn't even know existed. Meanwhile, I was sitting in peaceful isolation, armed with knowledge that could solve their problems but bound by agreements that prevented me from helping. The situation was both frustrating and oddly empowering. My phone buzzed with another text message, this one from Tom Jenkins, one of Diana's remaining analysts. "Hey Jessica, hope you're doing okay. Quick question. Do you remember the password for the Peterson Group's shared drive? We can't access the updated models you were working on." The text revealed multiple problems. First, proper transition procedures hadn't been followed, leaving critical information inaccessible. Second, Tom was reaching out directly, despite what were probably explicit instructions not to contact me. Third, the urgency suggested that client deadlines were at risk. I couldn't provide the password without potentially violating confidentiality agreements, but I also couldn't ignore a former colleague's genuine request for help. I decided on a compromise response. "Tom, I recommend contacting IT security for password resets. All critical files should be backed up on the main server. Good luck with everything." It was a diplomatic non-answer that provided general guidance without revealing specific information. But it also highlighted the chaos that was apparently consuming my former department. As I got ready for bed that night, I reflected on the strange liminal space I was occupying. I wasn't unemployed, but I couldn't work. I wasn't powerless, but I couldn't exercise my authority. I had answers to problems I wasn't allowed to solve, and knowledge about futures I couldn't reveal. In 12 more days, everything would change. Diana would learn that her unprofessional former subordinate was now her superior. The team struggling with my former responsibilities would discover who their new regional director really was. The clients threatening to leave would find out that their trusted analyst hadn't disappeared after all. But until then, I had to watch from the sidelines as the consequences of Diana's decision played out in increasingly dramatic fashion. It was like knowing the ending of a movie while everyone else was still trying to figure out the plot. The only question was whether Diana's department, soon to be my department, would survive the transition period intact enough to salvage the relationships and reputation that were currently at risk, and whether I'd be able to resist the growing temptation to intervene before my official start date arrived. By Thursday morning, 3 days after my termination, the situation at Meridian had escalated from departmental chaos to company-wide crisis. I learned this not through direct contact. I'd been deliberately avoiding calls from former colleagues, but through an unexpected source. The local business news. Financial services firm Meridian faces client exodus amid management changes, read the headline on Chicago Business Daily's website. The article, though brief, painted a damning picture of my former department's rapid deterioration. I sat in a downtown coffee shop, reading the article on my laptop while pretending to job hunt like any other unemployed professional. The irony of researching my own workplace crisis while surrounded by actual job seekers wasn't lost on me. According to the reporter, 2 major clients had formally requested account transfers, citing, quote, concerns about service continuity and analytical capability. The article quoted an anonymous industry source suggesting that Meridian's Chicago office had, quote, lost institutional knowledge due to recent personnel changes. What the article didn't mention was that I'd received 4 more calls from former clients in the past 2 days, each expressing confusion about their account status and frustration with the responses they'd received from Diana's remaining team. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Jessica, this is Amanda Rodriguez from Channel 7 Business News. We're covering the Meridian story and would love to get your perspective as a former employee. Can we set up a brief interview?" The media attention was the last thing I needed. Speaking to reporters would not only violate my confidentiality agreements, but could also jeopardize my upcoming position before it even began. I deleted the message without responding, but the media interest confirmed what I'd been suspecting. Diana's problems were no longer contained within the department. When business reporters started investigating personnel changes at mid-sized financial firms, it meant the disruption was significant enough to affect industry confidence. I decided to take a walk through Millennium Park to clear my head and think through the implications. The autumn air was crisp, and the lunch crowds provided good cover for someone trying to avoid being recognized by former colleagues or persistent journalists. As I walked past the Bean, my phone rang with a call from Michael Rodriguez, the regional vice president who'd offered me the director position. This was the first contact I'd had with anyone from corporate since my termination, and I wasn't sure what to expect. Jessica, I hope I'm not catching you at a bad time. Not at all, Mr. Rodriguez. How can I help you? I wanted to check in about how you're handling the transition period. I know this situation is unusual, and I want to make sure you're comfortable with how things are progressing. Comfortable was definitely not the word I'd use to describe watching my former workplace implode while being powerless to intervene. But I chose diplomacy over honesty. It's certainly been an interesting week, I said carefully. I'm using the time to prepare for the new role. Good, that's exactly what I was hoping to hear. I also wanted to give you a heads up that we may need to accelerate our timeline slightly. The situation in Chicago is developing more rapidly than we anticipated. This was corporate speak for, everything is falling apart faster than we expected. I waited for him to elaborate. We've had some client meetings this week that have raised concerns about service stability. Nothing catastrophic, but enough to suggest that we might want to implement the leadership transition sooner rather than later. How much sooner are we talking about? Potentially by Monday of next week instead of the following Monday. Would that create any problems for you? Problems? The only problem would be containing my excitement about ending this bizarre limbo period a week early. But I maintain professional composure. I can accommodate that timeline, but what about the announcement protocols and staff preparation? We're working on an expedited communication plan. The board met yesterday and approved moving forward with the restructuring announcement on Friday. That would give everyone a weekend to process the changes before you officially start. My head was spinning with the implications. In less than 48 hours, Diana would learn about my promotion. The colleagues who'd watched me get escorted out would discover that their former teammate was returning as their boss. The clients threatening to leave would find out that their trusted analyst had never really left at all. Mr. Rodriguez, what about the current departmental situation? I've heard through informal channels that there are some transition challenges. There was a pause. Jessica, I'm going to be frank with you. The decision to terminate your employment was made at the departmental level, without consultation with regional management. If we had been aware of the potential client impact, we would have handled things differently. Translation: Diana had acted without proper authority and was now facing consequences that extended far beyond her department. We've had several client meetings this week, he continued, including emergency sessions with both Peterson Group and Morrison Industries. Both have expressed serious concerns about continuity, and Peterson has formally requested that you be involved in their account management going forward. What did you tell them? That we were exploring all options to ensure their satisfaction. Which is true, one of those options being your return in an expanded leadership capacity. The conversation continued for another 10 minutes, covering logistics about office transitions, staff meetings, and client communications. By the time we hung up, I had a clear picture of just how dramatically the situation had deteriorated since my termination. But I also had a new appreciation for the political complexity of corporate restructuring. My firing hadn't been a simple personality conflict between Diana and me. It had been a catalyst that exposed systemic problems throughout the regional operations. I walked back toward my apartment, my mind racing with plans and preparations. If I was starting on Monday instead of the following week, I had only 4 days to finalize my strategy for the new role. That afternoon, I received an unexpected visitor. My building's doorman called to announce that Sarah Chen, from my former workplace, was asking to come up. I hesitated, knowing that any conversation with current Meridian employees could be complicated. But Sarah had been genuinely supportive during my final days. Sarah, this is a surprise. Come on in. She looked exhausted, with the kind of stressed pallor that comes from working too many late nights in a row. Jessica, I hope you don't mind me stopping by. I got your address from the emergency contact list, and I really needed to talk to someone. Of course. Can I get you some coffee or tea? Coffee would be great, thanks. She settled into my small living room while I prepared drinks. Jess, everything is falling apart at the office. I mean everything. What's happening? After you left, Diana tried to redistribute your client files among the remaining analysts. But nobody understood your organizational system or your analytical models. Tom Jenkins has been working 16-hour days, just trying to figure out the Peterson Group portfolio structure. She took a sip of coffee before continuing. Then yesterday, Ben Morrison showed up at the office unannounced, demanding to speak with whoever was handling his account. Diana tried to handle the meeting herself, but it was obvious she didn't understand the technical details. He walked out after 20 minutes and said he was considering other options. This confirmed what I'd suspected about the Morrison situation, but hearing it directly from someone who'd witnessed it made the reality more stark. What about the rest of the team? How are they handling the workload? Badly. Jennifer Martinez submitted her resignation yesterday, saying the stress wasn't worth it. David Park has been calling in sick, but everyone knows he's interviewing elsewhere. And Diana? Sarah paused, looking uncomfortable. What about Diana? She's been in and out of meetings with HR and upper management all week. There are rumors that she's being investigated for improper termination procedures, but nobody knows for sure. What I do know is that she's been making frantic calls trying to reach you. I'd been ignoring calls from Meridian numbers, but apparently Diana's desperation was escalating. Sarah, I appreciate you keeping me informed, but I'm not sure there's anything I can do to help at this point. I know, and I'm not asking you to fix our problems. I just wanted you to know that everyone recognizes what a mistake your termination was. Even the people who didn't speak up before are saying that Diana acted too hastily. The vindication felt good, but it was complicated by knowing what was coming. In a few days, these same colleagues would be dealing with an entirely different set of changes. How is morale overall? Terrible. People are updating their resumes and networking like crazy. There's a feeling that if someone as competent as you could be fired for quote, unprofessional conduct, then nobody's job is really secure. This was another consequence I hadn't fully considered. My termination hadn't just disrupted client relationships. It had undermined employee confidence in management's decision-making and job security. Sarah stayed for another hour, sharing details about the daily chaos that had become routine at our former workplace. Client complaints, missed deadlines, technical problems that nobody knew how to solve. It painted a picture of an organization in freefall. After she left, I spent the evening thinking about leadership transition strategies. When I officially started on Monday, I'd be inheriting a demoralized team, angry clients, and a reputation crisis. The challenge wouldn't just be implementing new policies. It would be rebuilding confidence and stability from the ground up. That night, I received another unexpected call, this time from Marcus Chen at Peterson Group. Jessica, I wanted to follow up on our conversation earlier this week. We had a meeting with Meridian management today, and I have to say, we're not impressed with the proposed solutions. What kind of solutions were they proposing? Essentially, they want to assign a senior analyst from their Milwaukee office to handle our account remotely, with periodic trips to Chicago for in-person meetings. But the person they're suggesting doesn't have experience with our sector, and frankly, we don't have confidence in a remote management approach for something this complex. The Milwaukee office, that was one of the locations I'd be overseeing as regional director. The irony of Meridian trying to solve their Chicago problems with resources from an office that was also underperforming was almost comedic. Have you made any decisions about the account? We're giving them until next Friday to present a more comprehensive solution. If they can't demonstrate that they have the expertise and resources to maintain the service level we need, we'll be moving our business elsewhere. Next Friday. That would be my second day in the new role, assuming the accelerated timeline Michael Rodriguez had mentioned came to pass. Mr. Chen, I hope everything works out in a way that serves your company's interests. Jessica, can I ask you something directly? Are you planning to stay in Chicago? And would you be interested in discussing opportunities with firms that could handle accounts like ours? The question was both a compliment and a complication. Marcus Chen was essentially offering to follow me wherever I landed, which was exactly the kind of client loyalty that made me valuable to employers. But I couldn't reveal that I was already landing somewhere, specifically in a position where I could indeed handle his account. Mr. Chen, I appreciate your confidence in my abilities. I think you should focus on working with Meridian to find a solution that meets your needs. There are talented people there who can learn to handle your account with proper support and resources. It was the most honest answer I could give without violating confidentiality agreements. Friday morning brought the news I'd been waiting for. Michael Rodriguez called to confirm that the restructuring announcement would be made at 3 p.m. that day. with my official start date moved to Monday morning. Jessica, we've prepared a comprehensive communication plan that addresses both the leadership changes and the client relationship concerns. We'll be announcing your appointment as regional director along with several other organizational improvements designed to strengthen our Midwest operations. How detailed will the announcement be about my background? We'll be highlighting your analytical expertise, your client relationship experience, and your proven track record of innovative problem solving. We won't specifically mention your recent employment history with the Chicago office, but obviously that information will become clear to your former colleagues. In other words, they were going to let Diana and her team figure out for themselves that their unprofessional former colleague was returning as their new boss. I spent Friday afternoon in anxious anticipation, checking my phone every few minutes for signs that the announcement had been made. At 3:17 p.m., my phone exploded with activity. Calls, texts, and emails from numbers I recognized and some I didn't. The first message was from Sarah Chen. "Holy shit, Jessica. Did you know about this?" The second was from Tom Jenkins. "Jessica, I just saw the announcement. Congratulations. Also, can we talk about the Peterson files?" But the most telling message came from a number I didn't recognize. "This is Diana Mitchell. We need to talk immediately." I stared at Diana's text for a long moment, imagining the conversation that was about to take place. After 3 days of frantic attempts to contact me for help with the chaos she'd created, she was now faced with the reality that I wasn't just a former employee she could call for favors. I was her new boss. The weekend suddenly felt very long. I had 2 days to prepare for what might be the most uncomfortable Monday morning of my professional career, but I also had 2 days to savor the anticipation of walking back into that office. Not as a terminated employee, but as the regional director, with the authority to implement every improvement I'd been suggesting for the past year. Diana's assumption that the department would manage just fine without me was about to be tested in ways she never could have imagined. The weekend that followed the announcement felt like the calm before a hurricane. My phone had been buzzing nonstop since 3 p.m. Friday, but I'd made a deliberate decision to let most calls go to voicemail. I needed time to process what was about to happen and prepare for what would undoubtedly be the most challenging Monday of my career. Saturday morning, I finally listened to the messages that had accumulated. There were congratulations from former colleagues at other companies, questions from headhunters who'd apparently been caught off guard by the news, and increasingly frantic messages from my soon-to-be former colleagues at Meridian. But the most interesting call was from someone I hadn't expected, Jennifer Martinez, the analyst who'd reportedly resigned earlier in the week. "Jessica, I just saw the announcement, and I'm honestly in shock. When I submitted my resignation on Wednesday, I had no idea you were coming back, let alone as regional director. I'm calling because, while I'm wondering if my resignation is really final, or if there might be opportunities to discuss my future with the company under new leadership." Jennifer was a solid analyst who'd been consistently undermined by Diana's micromanagement style. Her resignation had been a direct result of the chaos following my termination, and now she was essentially asking for her job back. It was exactly the kind of situation I'd be dealing with regularly in my new role. Lo. I called her back Saturday afternoon, choosing my words carefully. "Jennifer, I appreciate you reaching out. I can't make any specific commitments about staffing decisions before I officially start, but I'd be very interested in having a conversation early next week about your experience and your interest in staying with the company." "Jessica, can I be completely honest with you? The reason I resigned wasn't just the workload after you left. It was because Diana called an emergency meeting Tuesday morning and basically told us that anyone who wasn't completely committed to her vision for the department should consider whether Meridian was the right fit for them. It felt like a threat. This was new information that painted Diana's management during the crisis in an even worse light. Instead of rallying her team to handle the challenges, she'd apparently been issuing ultimatums and questioning people's loyalty. "That sounds like a difficult situation," I said diplomatically. "What I can tell you is that my approach to team management will be focused on collaboration, professional development, and utilizing everyone's strengths to serve our clients effectively." That's exactly what I was hoping to hear. "Jessica, I've worked with a lot of managers, and you have a gift for bringing out the best in people. I'd love the opportunity to be part of whatever you're building." After hanging up with Jennifer, I realized that my new role would involve not just fixing operational problems, but also rebuilding a team culture that had been damaged by weeks of poor leadership and uncertainty. Saturday evening brought an unexpected visitor. My neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, an elderly woman who lived in the apartment next door and occasionally borrowed sugar or asked for help with her computer. But this visit was different. "Jessica, dear, I hope you don't mind me stopping by. I've been hearing your phone ring constantly for the past 2 days, and I wanted to make sure you were all right. You seemed so upset when you came home early on Tuesday." Mrs. Patterson was a retired school principal, with an uncanny ability to read people's emotional states. I'd been polite but distant with my neighbors since moving in, but her genuine concern was touching. "I'm fine, Mrs. Patterson, just dealing with some work-related changes." "Good changes, I hope. You work so hard, and you seem like such a dedicated young woman." Something about her maternal concern made me want to share more than I usually would with neighbors. "Actually, yes, they're good changes. I got a promotion this week that will involve some significant new responsibilities." "How wonderful." You know, in my 40 years as an educator, I learned that the best leaders are often the ones who face adversity with grace. If these past few days have been challenging for you, it probably means you're exactly the right person for whatever lies ahead. Her intuitive wisdom was surprisingly comforting. Mrs. Patterson had no idea what I'd been through, but her observation about adversity and leadership felt remarkably relevant to my situation. Sunday morning, I decided to visit the Meridian building to see it from my new perspective. I wasn't planning to go inside, that would wait until Monday, but I wanted to look at the space where I'd be working and mentally prepare for the transition. Standing on the sidewalk across from the 32-story building, I noticed details I'd never paid attention to before. The architecture was impressive but slightly dated, suggesting a company that had been successful but maybe wasn't keeping pace with more modern competitors. The lobby I could see through the glass doors looked formal and traditional. Not necessarily bad, but perhaps not the most welcoming environment for younger professionals or innovative thinking. As I stood there, I saw several people I recognized entering the building. It was Sunday, but apparently some of my former colleagues were working weekend hours trying to catch up on the chaos that had been accumulating all week. One of them was David Park, the analyst who'd reportedly been calling in sick while interviewing elsewhere. Seeing him going into the office on Sunday suggested that either the workload had become completely unmanageable or Diana was requiring weekend work to compensate for the week's problems. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Jessica, this is David Park. I know you probably can't talk about your new position yet, but I wanted you to know that I withdrew my application with Morgan Stanley after hearing Friday's announcement. Really looking forward to working with you in your new role." The text confirmed what I'd suspected about people interviewing elsewhere, but it also showed that the announcement of my promotion was already affecting employee retention decisions. David was a talented analyst who would have been a significant loss for Meridian. I texted back, "Thanks, David. Let's plan to have a detailed conversation early this week about department priorities and your career goals." Sunday afternoon, I finally decided to deal with the elephant in the room: Diana's increasingly desperate attempts to contact me. She'd called 6 times since Friday's announcement, left 4 voicemails, and sent 3 text messages. Her tone had evolved from commanding to pleading to barely controlled panic. Her most recent voicemail, left at 11 a.m. Sunday, was particularly revealing. "Jessica, I know you're probably busy preparing for your new role, but I really need to speak with you before Monday. There are some situations with client accounts that require your specific knowledge, and I think we need to coordinate on transition procedures. Please call me back as soon as possible." The irony was staggering. 4 days earlier, Diana had confidently declared that the department would manage fine without me. Now she was acknowledging that my specific knowledge was essential for handling client situations. But I couldn't return her call without compromising my position. Anything I said to Diana before officially starting my new role could be interpreted as overstepping boundaries or attempting to manage situations I didn't yet have authority to address. Instead, I spent Sunday evening preparing for what I expected would be a very difficult conversation on Monday morning. I reviewed Diana's personnel file, which Michael Rodriguez had provided as part of my transition materials, and studied the department's organizational structure to understand reporting relationships and decision-making processes. What I found was concerning but not surprising. Diana's performance reviews over the past 18 months showed a pattern of declining scores in areas like team collaboration and adaptability to change. Her most recent review, completed just 2 months before my termination, included specific feedback about resistance to innovative approaches and difficulty accepting input from subordinates. The review had been completed by her previous supervisor, who'd been transferred to another region shortly afterward. It seemed likely that Diana's promotion to department manager had been more about filling a vacancy than recognizing exceptional leadership potential. I also discovered that Diana's educational background was primarily in traditional finance, with minimal exposure to the kind of advanced analytics and risk modeling that had become standard in our industry. This explained her resistance to my suggestions about updating methodologies. She literally didn't understand the technical advantages of the approaches I'd been proposing. Sunday evening brought one final surprise, a call from Marcus Chen at Peterson Group. "Jessica, I hope you don't mind me calling on a Sunday evening. I just wanted to tell you how relieved we are about Friday's announcement. When we threatened to move our account, we honestly weren't sure if Meridian had the capability to address our concerns. Learning that you'll be leading the regional operations changes everything. Mr. Chen, I appreciate your confidence. I'm looking forward to working with you to ensure that Peterson Group receives the level of service you deserve. Actually, that's why I'm calling. We'd like to propose expanding our relationship with Meridian under your leadership. We have 2 subsidiary companies that could benefit from the kind of analytical work you've done for us, and we'd be interested in discussing comprehensive portfolio management for our entire corporate family." This was exactly the kind of opportunity I'd been hoping to create through improved service delivery and innovation. Instead of just retaining existing clients, we could be growing relationships and expanding revenue streams. That sounds like something we should definitely explore. Let me get settled in my new role this week, and then let's schedule a comprehensive planning meeting. Perfect. Jessica, I have to tell you, your termination last week was a real wake-up call for us about the importance of working with organizations that recognize and retain talent. We're excited about what you'll be able to accomplish with proper authority and resources. After hanging up with Marcus Chen, I realized that my termination had paradoxically strengthened my relationship with key clients. They'd seen firsthand what happened when competent leadership was removed, and they were now more committed than ever to working with me specifically. As I prepared for bed Sunday night, I tried to envision what Monday morning would bring. Walking into the office as regional director instead of a terminated employee. Seeing the faces of colleagues who'd watched me get escorted out just 5 days earlier. Sitting down across from Diana for what would undoubtedly be one of the most awkward conversations in corporate history. But I also thought about the opportunities ahead. The chance to implement the improvements I'd been advocating for months. The possibility of building a team culture based on collaboration and innovation, instead of hierarchy and resistance to change. The potential to turn around not just the Chicago office but the entire Midwest region. I set my alarm for 6 a.m., planning to arrive at the office early to get oriented before the inevitable flood of meetings and conversations that would define my first day. I chose my outfit carefully, professional but not overly formal, authoritative but approachable. As I drifted off to sleep, I couldn't help but smile at the thought of Diana's reaction when I walked through those doors on Monday morning. She'd spent a week learning exactly how essential I was to the department's operations. Now she was about to learn that the unprofessional employee she'd fired was the person who would be evaluating her performance and determining her future with the company. The woman who had confidently declared that the department would manage just fine without me was about to discover just how wrong she'd been about everything. Monday couldn't come soon enough. Monday morning, 7:30 a.m. I stood in the lobby of the Meridian Financial Services building, badge in hand, preparing to enter a workplace I'd been escorted out of just 6 days earlier. But this time, I wasn't arriving as Jessica Thompson, terminated analyst. I was Regional Director Jessica Thompson, here to take control of operations that had been spiraling toward disaster. The security guard at the front desk was someone new. Apparently Frank had already started his shift upstairs. The young woman behind the counter looked at my temporary executive badge with the kind of deference usually reserved for senior management. "Good morning, Miss Thompson. Mr. Rodriguez asked me to give you this." She handed me a sealed envelope along with a key card. "Your office is on the 31st floor, and he'd like to meet with you at 9 o'clock to review the transition timeline." The 31st floor. Just one floor below the executive level, in the same section where I'd met with Rachel Davidson months ago when I thought I was just another investor. The elevator ride up felt surreal. The same mirrored walls, the same soft jazz playing overhead, but everything had changed about my place in this building's hierarchy. My new office was impressive in a way that my former cubicle decidedly was not. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of Lake Michigan, and the space was easily 4 times larger than what I'd been used to. A mahogany desk dominated the center of the room, flanked by a conference table that could seat 8 people comfortably. But what struck me most was the silence. From up here, the daily chaos of the department floors felt distant and manageable. It was the kind of space designed for strategic thinking rather than tactical problem-solving, for making decisions that affected hundreds of people rather than managing individual client accounts. I settled into the leather chair behind my desk and opened the envelope the security guard had given me. Inside was a detailed schedule for my first week, including individual meetings with each department head, client calls with major accounts, and a company-wide announcement meeting scheduled for 11 a.m. At 8:15, my phone buzzed with a text from Sarah Chen. "Jess, people are going crazy down here." Diana called an emergency meeting for 8:30 and told everyone to be prepared to discuss, quote, "new organizational expectations." Nobody knows what that means, but she looks like she hasn't slept in 3 days. I could only imagine Diana's state of mind. She'd spent the weekend knowing that her former subordinate was returning as her new boss, probably oscillating between panic about her job security and desperate attempts to figure out how to manage the situation gracefully. At 8:45, I decided it was time to make my presence known. I took the elevator down to the 15th floor, my former workplace, and stepped into the familiar maze of cubicles and conference rooms. The morning buzz of activity stopped noticeably as people recognized me. Tom Jenkins was the first to approach, looking both relieved and slightly embarrassed. "Jessica, congratulations on the promotion. I have to admit, when I saw the announcement Friday, my first thought was relief that someone who actually understands our systems will be in charge." "Thanks, Tom. I'm looking forward to working with everyone to improve our processes and service quality." "About the Peterson Group files," he said quietly, "I know you probably can't just give me the passwords now that you're in management, but we're really struggling with their quarterly analysis. Is there a proper way to request access to your previous work?" It was a perfect example of how my change in status complicated simple interactions. Tom needed help with work I'd done, but the power dynamics had shifted dramatically. "Let's schedule a proper transition meeting this afternoon," I said. "I'll make sure you have everything you need to complete the Peterson analysis, and we can discuss long-term process improvements." As Tom walked away, I noticed Diana emerging from the main conference room, looking exactly as Sarah had described, exhausted, stressed, and trying desperately to maintain an appearance of control. Our eyes met across the office floor, and for a moment, neither of us moved. The last time we'd been in the same space, she'd been explaining to HR why my unprofessional conduct warranted immediate termination. Now she was facing the reality that the employee she'd dismissed was her new superior. Diana walked toward me with the forced confidence of someone who'd clearly rehearsed this moment multiple times over the weekend. "Jessica," she said, extending her hand for a formal handshake, "congratulations on your promotion. I look forward to working with you in your new capacity." Her tone was perfectly professional, but I could see the tension in her posture and the uncertainty in her eyes. This was probably the most difficult conversation she'd ever had to initiate. "Thank you, Diana. I'm sure we'll have a productive working relationship." I shook her hand briefly. "I'd like to schedule a detailed transition meeting with you this week to discuss departmental operations and strategic priorities." "Of course. My calendar is completely flexible to accommodate your schedule." The subtext was clear. Diana was now deferring to my authority after spending months resisting my input as a subordinate. The role reversal was complete, but I could see that she was struggling to navigate it gracefully. "Excellent. Let's plan on Wednesday afternoon for a comprehensive review. In the meantime, I'll need current status reports on all major client accounts and any outstanding issues that require immediate attention. I'll have those prepared for you by end of business today, Diana said quickly. As she walked away, I noticed that several colleagues had been watching our interaction from a respectful distance. The office dynamics had clearly shifted overnight, and everyone was trying to figure out how to relate to me in my new role. Sarah Chen approached next, grinning broadly, despite obviously trying to maintain professional decorum. Jessica, this is absolutely surreal. 5 days ago, we were all in shock about you being fired, and now you're back as everyone's boss. How long have you known about this promotion? It was the question everyone would be asking, and I needed to handle it carefully. The truth was complicated, but I couldn't reveal details about the confidential restructuring process. The opportunity developed recently, I said diplomatically. Corporate had been evaluating regional operations, and they felt that my background and client relationships made me a good fit for the director role. So when Diana fired you last Tuesday, did you already know you were getting promoted? Sarah, I can't discuss the specific timeline of corporate decisions, but I will say that sometimes what appears to be an ending turns out to be a beginning. She laughed. That's probably the most diplomatic way anyone has ever said yes, and Diana screwed up massively. At 9 a.m. sharp, I made my way to Michael Rodriguez's office for our scheduled transition meeting. His office was on the 32nd floor, in the executive suite where major strategic decisions were made. Jessica, welcome to your first official day. How are you feeling about everything? Honestly, it's surreal, but I'm excited about the opportunities and ready to tackle the challenges. Good, because we have some significant challenges to address immediately. He pulled out a thick folder. Over the weekend, we received formal complaints from 3 major clients about service disruptions. 2 others have requested meetings to discuss their account status, which, in corporate speak, usually means they're considering leaving. The situation was even worse than I'd realized. Client dissatisfaction had escalated from individual concerns to formal complaints that could affect Meridian's industry reputation. What specific issues are they citing? Delayed responses to queries, inability to access account information that was previously readily available, and concerns about analytical capability following, quote, recent personnel changes. They're not explicitly mentioning your termination, but the timing makes it obvious. How do you want me to handle this? Directly. I want you to personally contact each complaining client today, introduce yourself in your new capacity, and schedule face-to-face meetings to address their concerns. Your previous relationships with these clients should help, but we need to move quickly to prevent further defections. We spent the next hour reviewing regional operations, discussing budget allocations, and planning strategic initiatives for the coming quarter. It was exactly the kind of high-level planning conversation I'd been hoping to have for months, but the urgency created by the past week's chaos added pressure to everything. At 10:30, I returned to the 15th floor for an impromptu meeting with my new team. Diana had assembled everyone in the main conference room, the same room where I'd been terminated 6 days earlier. Walking into that space as the person in charge instead of the person being dismissed felt like stepping into an alternate reality. The faces around the table showed a mixture of curiosity, relief, and uncertainty about what my leadership would mean for their daily work lives. Good morning, everyone. I know this transition is unusual, and I want to address the situation directly. I looked around the table, making eye contact with each person. 6 days ago, I was terminated from my analyst position. Today, I'm starting as regional director. I'm sure you have questions about how this happened and what it means going forward. Tom Jenkins raised his hand tentatively. Jessica, can you tell us anything about why the restructuring happened so quickly? What I can tell you is that corporate has been evaluating regional performance for several months. Recent events accelerated their timeline for implementing changes, but the decision to create this position was based on long-term strategic planning, not just immediate crisis management. David Park spoke up next. Will there be other personnel changes? People are worried about job security after everything that's happened. It was a fair concern. In 1 week, they'd seen their colleague fired, their manager's authority undermined, and their department reorganized under completely new leadership. My priority is building a stable, effective team that can serve our clients excellently. I'm not planning wholesale changes, but I will be evaluating processes and procedures to identify areas for improvement. Anyone who's committed to professional growth and collaborative problem-solving will have opportunities to advance. The meeting continued for 45 minutes, covering everything from immediate client concerns to long-term departmental goals. What struck me most was how different the dynamic felt compared to meetings under Diana's leadership. People asked substantive questions, offered suggestions for improvements, and seemed genuinely engaged in problem-solving rather than just trying to avoid criticism. After the meeting, Diana lingered as others filed out. She clearly wanted to have a private conversation, but I could see her struggling with how to approach it. "Jessica, I know this situation is awkward for both of us," she finally said. "I want you to know that I respect your new authority, and I'm committed to making this transition work smoothly." "I appreciate that, Diana. I think we can build a productive working relationship if we focus on our shared goals of serving clients effectively and supporting our team." "About last Tuesday," she said hesitantly, "I want you to understand that my decision was based on what I thought was best for the department at the time. I realize now that I may have acted hastily. It was as close to an apology as I was likely to get, and probably as much accountability as Diana was capable of taking. Diana, we both learned things from that experience. What matters now is how we move forward together." The rest of Monday passed in a blur of client calls, status meetings, and orientation sessions. By 6 p.m., I'd spoken personally with every major client who'd raised concerns, scheduled follow-up meetings with 3 of them, and received commitments from 2 others to maintain their accounts pending improved service delivery. As I prepared to leave my new office, I looked out at the Chicago skyline and reflected on the day's surreal journey. 6 days ago, I'd been escorted out of this building as a terminated employee. Today, I'd returned as a regional executive with the authority to fix every problem I'd been complaining about for months. My phone buzzed with a text from Rachel, my friend from the marketing firm. "Saw your name in today's business news. Financial services executive appointed to leadership role following client retention challenges. Sounds like there's a story here. Dinner tomorrow night to celebrate?" Tomorrow night seemed like a lifetime away. I still had 4 more days of this first week to navigate, including the conversation with Diana, that would determine whether she could adapt to our new dynamic or would need to find opportunities elsewhere. But as I rode the elevator down to the lobby, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months: the satisfaction of being exactly where I belonged, doing exactly what I was meant to do. The woman who'd been fired for being, quote, unprofessional, had returned as the professional who would determine everyone else's future. And that future was looking very promising indeed. Kili Lemistari. Nifini BTD. Tuesday morning brought the first real test of my authority. I arrived at the office to find an urgent email from Marcus Chen at Peterson Group, sent at 11:47 p.m. the previous night. The subject line read, "Emergency portfolio review required. Immediate response needed." The email detailed a concerning development. Peterson Group's board of directors had received a preliminary quarterly report that contained significant errors in risk assessment calculations. Marcus was demanding an immediate explanation and corrective action, threatening to terminate their contract if the situation wasn't resolved within 48 hours. I checked the file timestamps and discovered that the report had been submitted by Tom Jenkins on Friday afternoon, just hours after the corporate restructuring announcement. In the chaos of trying to complete work he didn't fully understand, Tom had apparently made critical mistakes that could cost us our largest client. This was exactly the kind of crisis that Diana's poor transition planning had made inevitable. But now it was my responsibility to fix it, and I had less than 2 days to save a $3 million account. I called Tom into my office immediately. He arrived looking pale and clearly anticipating bad news. "Tom, we need to discuss the Peterson Group quarterly report. Have you seen Marcus Chen's email from last night?" "Yes. I've been awake since 6 a.m. trying to figure out where I went wrong." "Jessica, I know I messed up, but I was working with incomplete data and methodologies I didn't fully understand." His honesty was refreshing, and it confirmed what I'd suspected about the impossible position Diana had put the remaining team in. "Walk me through your process. What information did you have access to, and where did you encounter problems?" For the next 30 minutes, Tom detailed his attempts to replicate my analytical approach using fragmented files and incomplete documentation. It became clear that the errors weren't due to incompetence but rather to missing critical data points and unclear process instructions. Tom, here's what we're going to do. I'm going to work with you today to completely redo the Peterson analysis using the proper methodology. You'll learn the correct approach, Peterson will get accurate information, and we'll use this as a training opportunity for future similar projects. The relief on his face was immediate. You're not firing me? Tom, you made mistakes with inadequate resources and insufficient guidance. That's a management failure, not an employee failure. But I do need you to commit to learning the correct processes so this doesn't happen again. We spent the rest of the morning working through the Peterson portfolio analysis step by step. I showed Tom the comprehensive data sources I'd been using, explained the risk calculation methodologies, and demonstrated how to interpret complex derivative positions. What struck me was how eager Tom was to learn, and how quickly he grasped concepts once they were properly explained. Diana's approach had been to assign work without providing adequate training or resources, then blame employees when they struggled. By lunchtime, we'd identified and corrected all the errors in the quarterly report. More importantly, Tom now understood the analytical framework well enough to handle similar projects independently. Jessica, I have to ask, why didn't Diana ever explain these processes this clearly? I've been working on complex portfolios for 8 months without really understanding the underlying methodology. It was a diplomatic way of asking why Diana had been such an ineffective teacher and manager. Different people have different management styles, Tom. My approach is to invest time and proper training up front so that everyone can work more independently and effectively later. At 1 p.m., I called Marcus Chen to discuss the corrected report and schedule an in-person meeting to review the findings. Jessica, I have to tell you how relieved I am to be speaking with someone who actually understands our portfolio complexity. The person I talked to last week couldn't even explain basic risk metrics. Mr. Chen, I want to personally apologize for the errors in Friday's report. I've worked with Tom Jenkins to correct all the issues, and I can guarantee this won't happen again. I appreciate that, but Jessica, this incident has raised broader concerns about Meridian's capability to handle our account. We need assurance that the service disruption we experienced last week was an anomaly, not a preview of ongoing problems. I'd like to propose a comprehensive portfolio review meeting for Thursday afternoon. I'll present our corrected analysis, discuss process improvements we're implementing, and outline how we plan to enhance service delivery going forward. That sounds reasonable. But Jessica, I want you to know that several board members are questioning whether we should continue with Meridian. This meeting will be crucial for our decision about the future of our relationship. After hanging up, I realized that saving the Peterson account would require more than just fixing the immediate problems. I needed to demonstrate that the chaos of the past week was an aberration, and that Meridian could provide the sophisticated analytical services that Peterson required. That afternoon, I called a meeting with Diana to discuss the Peterson situation and broader departmental operations. She arrived at my office with a thick folder of documents and a noticeably deferential attitude. Diana, we need to address some serious process issues that became apparent during the Peterson crisis. Of course, I've prepared status reports on all major accounts and identified several areas where we can improve our procedures. I was curious to see whether Diana would acknowledge her role in creating the problems or continue to deflect responsibility. Let's start with transition planning. When I was terminated last Tuesday, what steps did you take to ensure continuity for the accounts I'd been managing? Diana shifted uncomfortably. I distributed your client files among the existing team members based on their availability and expertise levels. Did you provide training on my analytical methodologies or documentation of my process workflows? I assumed that the files themselves would contain sufficient information for competent analysts to understand the work. This was exactly the kind of assumption that had led to the Peterson crisis. Diana had fundamentally misunderstood the complexity of modern financial analysis and the importance of institutional knowledge. Diana, sophisticated portfolio analysis isn't something you can learn by reading someone else's files. It requires understanding of methodology, familiarity with data sources, and experience with sector-specific risk factors. Assuming otherwise put both our clients and our analysts in impossible positions. I see that now, she said quietly. What would you recommend for preventing similar problems in the future? At least she was asking the right questions, even if it had taken a near catastrophe to get there. We need to implement comprehensive documentation standards, cross-training programs, and mentorship structures, so that no single person becomes an irreplaceable bottleneck for client service. We spent the next hour developing a plan for improving departmental processes and training protocols. Deanna participated constructively in the conversation, but I could sense that she was struggling with the role reversal and the implicit criticism of her previous management approach. Diana, I want to be direct about something. The past week has revealed some significant gaps in our operational procedures. Going forward, I'll be taking a more hands-on approach to ensure that we're meeting client expectations and supporting our team effectively. I understand. What does that mean for my role and responsibilities? It was the question I'd been expecting. Diana was essentially asking whether she still had a future at Meridian under my leadership. That depends largely on your willingness to adapt to new management approaches and collaborate on implementing necessary changes. I value experience and institutional knowledge, but I also need managers who can embrace innovation and continuous improvement. Jessica, I want to be honest with you. I've been doing this job for 18 months, and I've learned more about effective client management in the past 2 days working with you than I did in the previous year. I know I made mistakes with your termination and the transition planning. I'd like the opportunity to learn from those mistakes. It was the most genuine admission of fault I'd heard from Diana, and it suggested that she might be capable of adapting to our new dynamic. I appreciate your honesty, Diana. Let's work together over the next few weeks to implement improvements, and we'll evaluate how things are progressing. Wednesday morning brought another challenge, a surprise visit from Ben Morrison, the founder of Morrison Industries and one of our most important clients. He arrived unannounced at 9 a.m. asking to speak with whoever is actually in charge of client relations now. I met with him in the main conference room, the same space where I'd been terminated 8 days earlier. The irony wasn't lost on me as I sat across from a client who'd been threatening to leave because of Diana's mismanagement. Mr. Morrison, thank you for coming in. I understand you have concerns about your account management. Jessica, I'll be blunt. Last week's meeting with Diana Mitchell was a disaster. She couldn't answer basic questions about our portfolio structure, and she seemed to have no understanding of the investment strategy we'd developed together over the past 2 years. I sincerely apologize for that experience. The management transition created some temporary gaps in client service that we're working aggressively to address. I'm glad to hear that, but Jessica, I need to understand what's really happening here. Are you back with Meridian permanently, or is this some kind of temporary consulting arrangement? I'm back, permanently, as regional director. I have full authority over client relationships and service delivery for all our Midwest operations. Good. Because I was prepared to terminate our contract if I had to continue working with people who didn't understand our business. Your analytical work has been instrumental in our investment success, and frankly, I don't trust anyone else to handle our account. Ben Morrison's loyalty was both gratifying and concerning. While it confirmed the value of my work, it also highlighted how dependent some client relationships had become on my personal involvement. Mr. Morrison, while I appreciate your confidence in my abilities, one of my priorities is ensuring that you receive excellent service regardless of which specific team member you're working with. I want to introduce you to Tom Jenkins, who's been learning our analytical methodologies and will be your primary day-to-day contact going forward. As long as you're overseeing the work and available for complex decisions, I'm willing to work with your team. The meeting ended with Morrison agreeing to maintain his account and even expressing interest in expanding services to cover additional subsidiaries. It was exactly the kind of outcome that demonstrated the value of proper client relationship management. Thursday afternoon's meeting with Peterson Group proved to be the most critical test of my leadership so far. Marcus Chen arrived with 2 board members and their internal CFO, clearly prepared for a detailed evaluation of Meridian's capabilities. I presented the corrected quarterly analysis, explained the process improvements we'd implemented, and outlined our enhanced quality control procedures. But more importantly, I demonstrated the depth of analytical capability that Meridian could provide under proper leadership. Mr. Chen, the errors in last week's report were unacceptable, and I take full responsibility for ensuring they don't recur. However, I'd like to use this opportunity to discuss how we can enhance our services beyond just correcting past mistakes. I spent the next hour outlining advanced analytical approaches that could provide Peterson Group with more sophisticated risk management and investment optimization. It was the kind of strategic consulting that went far beyond basic account management. "Jessica, this is exactly the level of sophistication we've been hoping for," said one of the board members. "The question is whether Meridian has the institutional capability to deliver this consistently." "We do, and I'm prepared to personally guarantee that level of service." Additionally, I'd like to propose a pilot program where we provide enhanced analytics for one of your subsidiary companies to demonstrate our expanded capabilities. By the end of the meeting, Peterson Group had not only agreed to maintain their account, but had also committed to the pilot program and expressed interest in consolidating their other investment relationships with Meridian. As the Peterson team left, Marcus Chen pulled me aside. "Jessica, I have to ask, what happened to Diana Mitchell? She was supposedly in charge last week, but she's been completely absent from our discussions. Diana remains part of our team, but I'm now handling all major client relationships personally to ensure continuity and service quality." "Good, because frankly, we were losing confidence in Meridian's management capabilities. Having you in charge changes everything." That evening, as I reviewed the week's developments, I realized that the power shift was complete. Clients who'd been threatening to leave were now expanding their relationships. Team members who'd been struggling were now learning and growing. And Diana, who'd confidently declared that the department would manage just fine without me, was now asking for guidance on basic management principles. The woman who'd been fired for being, quote, unprofessional, had returned to save the very clients and colleagues that her termination had put at risk. And in doing so, I discovered that leadership wasn't about avoiding conflict or maintaining the status quo. It was about having the courage to implement necessary changes, even when they made others uncomfortable. Friday would bring new challenges, but for the first time in months, I felt confident that we had the tools and team to handle whatever came next. 3 months later, I stood in the same conference room where I'd been terminated, but the atmosphere couldn't have been more different. The space was filled with representatives from our largest clients, regional executives, and my entire team for Meridian's quarterly business review. What had once been a site of professional humiliation had become the venue for celebrating the most successful quarter in our region's history. "Ladies and gentlemen," Michael Rodriguez announced to the assembled group, "I'm pleased to report that under Regional Director Jessica Thompson's leadership, our Midwest operations have exceeded all performance targets for Q4. Client retention is at 98%, new account acquisition has increased by 34%, and overall revenue has grown by 27% compared to the same period last year." The applause that followed felt surreal. Sitting at the head of the conference table, I looked around at faces that represented the complete transformation of our regional operations. Marcus Chen from Peterson Group, who'd nearly terminated their contract in October, was now one of our strongest advocates. Ben Morrison had not only renewed his account, but had brought in 3 new subsidiary companies. Tom Jenkins, who'd struggled with complex analytics just months ago, was now training other analysts across multiple offices. And Diana Mitchell, who'd once declared that the department would manage just fine without me, was sitting 2 seats away, genuinely smiling as she took notes on our success metrics. The transformation hadn't been easy or immediate. The weeks following my return had been filled with difficult conversations, process overhauls, and the delicate work of rebuilding confidence among clients, employees, and corporate leadership. But perhaps the most significant change had been in Diana herself. After the quarterly presentation, as the room cleared and clients returned to their respective offices, Diana approached me with a manila folder in hand. "Jessica, do you have a few minutes? I wanted to discuss something important with you." Over the past 3 months, our working relationship had evolved from awkward necessity to genuine collaboration. Diana had proven surprisingly adaptable once she'd accepted that her previous management approach hadn't been effective. "Of course, Diana. What's on your mind?" She opened the folder and pulled out what appeared to be a resignation letter. My heart sank for a moment. Despite our rocky history, Diana had become a valuable contributor to our team's success. "Before you say anything," she said quickly, seeing my expression, "this isn't what you think it is. She handed me the document, but instead of a resignation, it was an application for Meridian's Executive MBA program, a company-sponsored initiative for high-potential managers. I've been thinking a lot about what you said months ago regarding continuous learning and professional development. I realized that my resistance to new ideas wasn't just about protecting my authority. It was about hiding the fact that I felt unprepared for the complexity of modern financial analysis. I looked over the application, impressed by the thoughtfulness of her proposed course of study. She'd outlined a curriculum focused on data analytics, strategic leadership, and change management, exactly the areas where she'd struggled most. Diana, this is excellent. What made you decide to pursue this now? Honestly, watching you work over the past 3 months, you approached every challenge as a learning opportunity rather than a threat. When Peterson Group nearly terminated their contract, instead of panicking or assigning blame, you used it as a chance to improve our processes and train the team. She paused, looking out the conference room windows at the Chicago skyline. I realized that I'd been managing defensively, trying to protect what I already knew rather than building new capabilities. That's why I resisted your suggestions so strongly. They highlighted gaps in my knowledge that I wasn't ready to acknowledge. And now? Now I understand that admitting what you don't know is the first step toward learning what you need to know. I want to be the kind of leader who can contribute to innovation, rather than just implementing established procedures. It was perhaps the most self-aware conversation Diana and I had ever had. The woman who'd fired me for being unprofessional was now asking for help becoming a more effective professional herself. Diana, I think this is a fantastic opportunity for you. I'd be happy to provide a recommendation letter and support your application. Thank you, Jessica. And I want you to know, working under your leadership has been the most professionally fulfilling experience I've had at Meridian. I understand now what collaborative management looks like. After Diana left, I remained in the conference room for a few minutes, reflecting on the journey that had brought us to this point. The termination that had seemed like such a devastating setback had ultimately created opportunities I never could have imagined. My phone buzzed with a text from Rachel, my friend from the marketing firm. Saw the Business Journal article about Meridian's turnaround. Regional director leads dramatic performance improvement following operational restructuring. Still can't believe you went from fired to featured in 3 months. The business press attention had been unexpected but welcome. Several industry publications had covered our regional transformation as a case study in effective crisis management and leadership transition. What they didn't know was that the crisis had been largely manufactured by my own termination. Later that afternoon, I was reviewing expansion plans for our Milwaukee office when Sarah Chen knocked on my door. Jessica, do you have time for a quick chat? I wanted to update you on the new analyst hiring process. Sarah had been promoted to Senior Analyst Coordinator, a role that involved recruiting and training new team members. It was exactly the kind of opportunity she'd deserved but hadn't received under Diana's more hierarchical management approach. How are the interviews going? Really well. We've had incredible interest from candidates across the region. Apparently, word has spread about the collaborative culture we've built here. Several people have specifically mentioned wanting to work in an environment where innovation is encouraged rather than discouraged. This was perhaps the most gratifying aspect of our transformation. We weren't just retaining existing talent. We were attracting new professionals who wanted to be part of what we were building. That's wonderful, Sarah. What qualities are you seeing in the strongest candidates? Technical competence, obviously, but also intellectual curiosity and collaborative attitudes. People who ask questions about our methodologies and suggest improvements, rather than just trying to fit into existing structures. It struck me that Sarah was describing exactly the qualities that Diana had once labeled as unprofessional conduct when I'd exhibited them. Have you had any candidates ask about our management philosophy or team dynamics? Actually, yes. Several people mentioned that they'd heard our department had undergone some significant changes and wanted to understand the current leadership approach. I think word has gotten out about how we've transformed our operations. That evening I had dinner with Tom Jenkins and his wife to celebrate his promotion to senior analyst. It had been exactly 6 months since the day I'd found him struggling with the Peterson Group files, and his professional growth had been remarkable. Jessica, I have to tell you something, Tom said over dessert. The day you were fired, I actually started updating my resume. I figured if they could terminate someone as competent as you, none of us were really safe. What changed your mind? When you came back as regional director and spent that entire day teaching me the Peterson analysis methodology. You could have fired me for the mistakes I'd made, but instead you invested time in helping me understand the work properly. That's when I realized this was the kind of place I wanted to build my career, Tom's wife Lisa added. He comes home from work excited about projects and challenges now. For months before your return, he was stressed and frustrated every day. These personal testimonials meant more to me than any performance metrics or client satisfaction scores. We hadn't just improved business outcomes. We'd created an environment where people could thrive professionally and feel valued for their contributions. The following week brought news that would complete the circle of transformation in the most unexpected way. Michael Rodriguez called to inform me that I'd been selected for promotion to Vice President of Strategic Operations, a position that would give me oversight of Meridian's entire Midwest and Southeast regions. Jessica, the board has been incredibly impressed with the turnaround you've achieved in Chicago. They want you to implement similar transformations across our broader regional operations. What would this mean for the Chicago office? We'd like you to recommend someone to take over as regional director. Obviously, you'd maintain oversight, but we need someone who can manage day-to-day operations while you focus on strategic initiatives. I didn't need to think long about my recommendation. I'd like to propose Diana Mitchell for the position. There was a pause. Diana Mitchell? The same Diana Mitchell who terminated your employment 6 months ago? The same Diana Mitchell who spent the past 3 months demonstrating remarkable leadership growth and collaborative problem-solving? She's completing an executive MBA program and has shown genuine commitment to the management principles that have driven our success. That's unexpected. Are you certain about this recommendation? Completely certain. Diana made mistakes in the past, but she's learned from them in ways that will make her a more effective leader going forward. Sometimes the best managers are the ones who've experienced failure and grown from it. The conversation continued for another 20 minutes, as I outlined Diana's qualifications and growth trajectory. By the end, Michael Rodriguez was convinced that my recommendation was based on merit rather than sentiment. 2 weeks later, I sat in my new office on the 33rd floor, looking down at the conference room where my journey at Meridian had taken its most dramatic turn. In a few minutes, I'd be announcing Diana's promotion to regional director at an all-hands meeting. The irony was delicious. The woman who'd fired me for being unprofessional was about to be promoted based on my recommendation. But more importantly, it represented the completion of a transformation that went far beyond individual career trajectories. We'd built something sustainable, a culture where mistakes became learning opportunities, where challenging ideas were welcomed rather than punished, and where leadership meant developing others rather than protecting territory. As I walked down to the conference room for the announcement meeting, I passed the cubicle where I'd worked for 3 years before my termination. A new analyst named Kevin Walsh, coincidentally sharing a name with the HR representative who'd processed my firing, was busy working on a complex portfolio analysis, probably unaware of the dramatic history associated with his workspace. The conference room was packed with employees from across our regional operations. Diana stood near the front, looking nervous but excited about the announcement she knew was coming. "Thank you all for being here today," I began. 6 months ago, this office was facing significant challenges with client retention, team morale, and operational efficiency. Today, we're celebrating the most successful quarter in our region's history and announcing organizational changes that will help us build on that success. I looked around the room, making eye contact with the people who'd been part of this transformation. Tom Jenkins, who'd grown from struggling analyst to senior mentor, Sarah Chen, who'd developed into an exceptional talent coordinator, and Diana Mitchell, who'd evolved from a defensive manager into a collaborative leader. I'm pleased to announce that Diana Mitchell will be promoted to regional director for our Chicago operations, effective next Monday. Diana has demonstrated exceptional growth in strategic thinking, team development, and client relationship management over the past several months. The applause was genuine and enthusiastic. Diana had earned the respect of her colleagues through her willingness to learn and adapt, not through positional authority. After the meeting, Diana approached me with tears in her eyes. Jessica, I don't know how to thank you for this opportunity. 6 months ago, I thought I'd destroyed my career when I fired you. I never imagined you'd be the person recommending me for promotion. Diana, you earned this promotion through your own growth and contributions. I just recognized what you'd accomplished. But you could have held grudges or focused on past mistakes. Instead, you invested in helping me become better at my job. That's what good leaders do, Diana. They help other people succeed, even when those people have made mistakes. As I walked back to my office that evening, I reflected on the strange journey that had brought me to this point. A termination that had felt like professional devastation had become the catalyst for the most rewarding period of my career. I'd learned that sometimes the best thing that can happen to you is being forced out of a situation that wasn't working, even when you can't see the alternatives yet. Diana's decision to fire me had ultimately freed both of us to become better versions of ourselves. The woman who'd been dismissed for being unprofessional had returned to build a culture where professionalism meant continuous learning, collaborative problem-solving, and the courage to admit when you were wrong. And the manager who'd fired her most challenging employee had discovered that the best way to lead was to embrace challenge rather than resist it. 6 months later, Diana sent me a photo from her MBA graduation ceremony. She was smiling broadly, holding her diploma, surrounded by classmates who'd become lifelong professional network connections. The text that accompanied the photo read, "Thank you for teaching me that being wrong about something is just the first step toward being right about it." I framed that photo and hung it in my office, not as a trophy of professional vindication, but as a reminder that the best kind of success is the kind that lifts others up along the way. Sometimes getting fired really is the best thing that can happen to your career, especially when it teaches everyone involved what good leadership actually looks like. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.